In any life, we have highs and lows, light and dark, wins and losses. What happens when we encounter that moment in time when what happens next could change everything? Join us as we step into another person's inspirational moment and see how we can connect their experience to ours. This is Greg Stevens, and you're listening to A Shot of Inspiration. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of A Shot of Inspiration. I'm Greg Stevens, your host, and today we have with us a really new friend, but also a good friend, Reta Clyde. And Reta just joined the Master Trainer group with Crucial Learning probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, maybe something like that.
About a year and a half ago, yeah.
About a year and a half ago, and we did a program in Pittsburgh together and had dinner both nights and just fell in love with her. She's got a great story today. And she even told me, she says, she's tired of telling her story. And that's one of the things, it's inspirational. So we're going to share it. Then we're also going to talk about what Rita's up to now as she's overcome some of those obstacles in her life. So Rita, thank you for being on the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks. Rita, tell us a little about your background, what happened before you got to Crucial Learning, how you got to Crucial Learning, and then a little about some of the trials that you've been dealing with your entire life and how you've looked at them and overcome them just by shifting your perspective around that.
So thank you again for the invitation. This is so fun, and I'm just so delighted to, even though I'm a little tired of telling my story, I'm delighted to share this because in some ways I think it's actually a cool story. So let me just provide some context. So how I got here to being a master trainer. My dad is a pastor, and I remember being a very little girl sitting on the front row in church, watching my dad preach and going, that's what I'm supposed to do. But in my faith heritage, women were not preachers. And so I had to figure out how to do that. How do I get there? How do I get to that place where I'm sharing words that I'm very passionate about, that I believe in? And it took me a while to figure out how to get to this place. But part of my journey really has to do with some physical limitations that I have. And it wasn't until I was about 49 or so that I really understood the challenges that I have. So I was born with a birth defect of my brain. It's called closed-lip schizencephaly with polymicrogyria.
Wow,
now,
that's
a
mouthful.
That's a lot of words. And it took me a while to even learn how to say it correctly. But essentially, I'm missing a part of my brain. So if you look at my MRI, there is a big black spot that's empty where there actually should be brain, and there's not. And this is a very rare birth defect. There's only about 8,000 cases that have been documented worldwide. And the severity of the physical fallout from that just depends on where the schizencephaly is and what part of the brain it's located in, how big it is, all of those things. There are some kiddos that are born with this that are just completely incapacitated and have to have 24-hour nursing care for their entire life. I feel fortunate in that I wasn't that severely impacted. But the impact to me is that my entire life, I've had limited motor skill on my entire left side. So things like I can't wink my left eye, I can't wiggle the toes on my left foot. I have terrible, because the left sides and the right sides of my body don't work the same. And my dad tells the story when I was about 5 years old. I said, Daddy, my hand doesn't work the way it's supposed to. So even as a really small child, I understood that something was not right, and the two sides of my body don't work the way they should. That kind of led to a lifetime of challenges. I type really fast, but I type almost exclusively with my right hand. So that really defined a lot of how I do things and what I can and cannot.
I think that's amazing that part of your brain, in essence, is missing. And it's amazing how the body can create new neural pathways to process and do different things, heal itself in one way. but also
Right.
one of the things we were talking about before we started record, talking about the limitations. When people see something like that, many people change their perspective and overcome it. Others stay stuck with it. Tell us more about the people that you run into that you try to inspire to move past the thing that's limiting them, because you've done it yourself and it's not easy, but it's worth it, isn't it?
Oh, 100%. And I credit my parents a lot with kind of giving me this mindset of overcoming. So, when my parents first realized that there was a challenge when I was a very small child, they took me to Oregon Children's Hospital, where we lived at the time. And being in the dark ages, there was no such thing as an MRI. And so the doctors there in 19, or we're not going to talk about what year that was, but there was no MRI. So the doctors there couldn't figure out what was wrong or what the challenge was. And so they told my parents, we don't know what this is, so let's call it nothing. And sent me on my way and told my parents to treat her like her brother, and away you go. So that was both good advice and later a little bit challenging. But what that did for me was I had these great parents who were like, you know what? Yeah, you can't use your left hand. Oh, right. Figure it out. And so that has become my mantra just throughout my life. If something happens, if there's an obstacle, if something's hard, figure it out. So just figuring out how to manage a family and go to school at the same time. All of those things were, okay, this is hard, figure it out. And so my parents let me do everything. They let me try things. So when I was in elementary school, I decided I wanted to play the violin. That's great, unless you have a hand that doesn't work quite well. So I was terrible at it, but I tried. In junior high, I wanted to play the flute. I wanted to be in the band. And again, my parents, there was never a time where they said, no, you really can't do that. You really shouldn't do that. They let me try. I, again, terrible flute player, because when one hand doesn't work quite right, it's really hard to manage that. But that's a way I just always approach the world is, okay, you want to do this? That's awesome. Figure it out. And so when I look at other people and I see people get to obstacles in the road, and sometimes people just stop. They go, oh man, I've got that obstacle. Either it's money or family or this thing, it's just too hard. And I'm just going to stop. And I want to say, no, obstacles are there to help us grow, to build that muscle. So if there's an obstacle in the road, go around it, go over it, dig under it, whatever that is, because those are the things that make us stronger, that make us better. And so I've never looked at my own story as being inspirational, because I think, so what? There's an obstacle, go around it, go over it, go under it, figure it out. And I think that's where, as people, we start seeing those big wins and we start gaining that confidence to do things maybe that are hard or scary or seem overwhelming. There's never a moment where I'm like, now I'm going to give up. I always think, oh no, man, I got to figure it out.
I think I love that, because as we do adult learning, I see so often one of the biggest problems is people not wanting to fail or look ridiculous or something like that. I think that's a part of learning something. And you said something that resonated with me. Your family supported you in figuring it out, so they let you fail.
Oh,
and
yeah.
They let you fail over and over till you succeeded at it. And so often I see many times, because I understand piece of a parent not wanting your child to fail or hurt, but you remove the obstacle, you remove the pain, you remove the lesson. And I think it's so important that even as adults, we have to get uncomfortable before we learn something, typically. I also find we typically don't take on learning something new until we have to.
Oh, 100%. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's sad. It would be nice if people could just look at, oh, I want to take this on and learn it. That would be the optimum. But most people have to get sick and tired of being sick and tired before they take action.
Oh, that's so true. I had a participant in a class just recently who, after the course, came up to me and almost after everybody had left the room. And he said, I was really anxious about coming to this class. He said, I really didn't want to be in this space where I was trying to learn how to communicate, because he said, I just felt so anxious and nervous about that. And he said, this was a great course. And he said, through the whole thing, you made me feel very calm about this learning process. And I thought, okay, then great, then I did my job. But it's that I think you're right. We approach learning, especially as adults, because sometimes we get entrenched in our habits, and there's this fear factor that I'm not sure I want to do that. I'm not sure I want to, I'm not sure I want to push on that particular bruise. And that's the way I always think of it. Sometimes when you press on a bruise, it's a little bit sore, but it reminds you of that thing you hit, or it's that reminder that, yeah, that hurt just a little bit. But what can I learn from that? I'm going to maybe avoid walking that direction again, or maybe I'm going to avoid whatever that thing is that caused the bruise in the first place. But you're absolutely right. As adults, there's a lot of anxiety there, and stepping into those hard things is getting around those obstacles.
Yeah, it is. And I find also when you have a group of peers together, people don't want to be vulnerable. They don't want to show that piece. But so often that's when the real learning will take place, is when you're vulnerable, only when you get that place and say, I don't know, I'm going to look stupid doing this, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the things you do in a class to try to create that comfort? Because I think every master trainer that I've worked with does it differently. And I love that, because one of the things I love about Crucial Learning is they let us be ourselves. They say, we're putting you in front of the room, go do your best. And they trust us to do that. So what do you think your strength is around that? What do you try to do with a group? How do you create that safe space for people in your classes?
So one of the things that I do, and this is an exercise that I've done just over and over because it works, I ask everybody to stand in the room, and then I'll ask them to go stand next to somebody they don't know. Now, that's the first thing. That's a little scary. Even grown-ups, small children, they want to gravitate to the people that they know, and that person's my friend. So I ask people to go stand next to somebody they don't know well. That's a little bit of a scary instruction, because you'll see adults that look around the room, and you'll see a little bit of anxiety on the face, but they'll make a connection with somebody that maybe they know a little bit, right? So they'll go stand next to somebody. And I call this exercise a 2-minute warming. And I'll always ask, okay, who are my football fans in the room? And I'll get a couple of people and I'll ask them who their favorite team is. And then I'll prompt them and say, okay, so what's the time period at the very end of a football game? And as I get a few blank stares, but somebody will say 2-minute warning. I'm like, yep, absolutely. We're going to do this exercise called the 2-minute warming. And this is how the exercise works. You have 2 minutes to find out 3 things about your partner: where they are originally from, why they do what they do, not what they do, but why they do what they do, and a fun fact. The funner, the better. So in 2 minutes, they have this great discussion, and it's a pretty short period of time. But then I'll ask everybody to be seated, and then I'll just get a couple of people to introduce their partner. Now, what I get from that exercise is it's a very short period of time, but they make a connection with somebody else, because all they are doing is asking questions, right? They're just asking questions to find out why people do what they do. And that's the money question. Right. Now, the fun fact, you always get some interesting fun things from that question. I had a participant one time who was the showcase winner on The Price is Right. That was their fun fact.
That's great.
So, I know. So you get some of those things, but it's the why question. Why do you do what you do?
Yeah.
And this is where we get to this connection, this human connection, where we're seeing one another through the lens of dignity. And when that happens, and after that exercise, everybody takes a breath and they relax. because they realize that they've made a connection with another person that they didn't have before. And maybe they understand, oh, hey, you know what? That person's a financial analyst. That seems like maybe a very data-driven, not people-oriented kind of career. But when I talk to this person who's a financial analyst, they have a why. They have a heart for helping people through this particular skill. And for me, that's the money question. That's where we get to that place of connection. And again, I've seen people just take a breath and relax and realize, maybe somebody else in the room is feeling anxious about this work as well. Maybe somebody else in this room is feeling uncomfortable in this class. And starting the day that way, every single time, it just works. It gets people interested and involved and connected. And so that for me has been my favorite way to start a class and get people engaged.
Well, I love that. So I'm going to flip it on you. I want you to answer those 3 questions for our audience. Walk us through you. I want you to answer all 3 and we can go back and forth.
Perfect. So I'm originally from a little town in Northern California called Eureka. It's about 300 miles north of San Francisco on the coast. It was a great place to grow up. It's a small community, fishermen, loggers, beautiful weather, beautiful country. So that is where I'm originally from. Why I do what I do. It's a little bit of a backstory. Again, my dad's a pastor. And so I'm hardwired to do this job just for a lot of reasons. Pardon me. I got a frog in my throat this morning. But my big driver around learning is when I was in college, the first time when I was not smart enough to finish when my parents were paying for it, I majored in English. Started as a business major and thought, oh man, this just doesn't feel like me. So I changed to an English major. I loved it. I loved words. I loved writing. I loved all of that, but I couldn't figure out what to do with it. I'm like, what do you do with an English major except for teach? And I thought, I don't really want to teach kids. So I really couldn't figure that out. Then I shifted and decided to start my own family. And so I was busy with that for several years. But when I went back to school, I started studying organizational development, which really spoke to a lot of things that I love, is helping people be the best version of themselves they can be. But along the way, I took a class in organizational learning and all of the bells went off. The angels started singing. I was like, oh, this is it. This is it. And bigger than that, I remember sitting, while I was taking this class, I remember sitting in a meeting. I was working at a different company at a time, and I was actually working in customer service. And sitting in a meeting, and somebody said something about a process change. And one of the women that was on my team said, when did that process change? And where was the notification about that? And somebody said, oh, that came out in an email. And I will never, ever forget this moment. This woman let her head drop. She sighed really big and she said, I can't read fast enough to keep up. And I thought, oh my goodness, are we missing people, really talented, wonderful people in organizations because we're only delivering information one way? And the reason that caught my attention was I have a son who's profoundly dyslexic. And so I learned over the years how to adapt things for him to meet his needs, because reading was not something he could do well. So I figured things out for him. That goes back to let's figure it out, right? But I will always remember her and that moment when I just thought, oh my goodness, we need to be doing this better. We need to be delivering content, whether it's technical content or personal development content, in a way that everybody gets it. Right. And so that's my why. I'm so just driven to make sure that people have the opportunity to be their best selves. And let's partner that with, are we delivering content in a way that makes sense for everybody in the room?
And I'm going to even go a little further. What's your why behind that? I think many times there's a why behind our why.
Oh, yeah. I think to dig into that, I have to talk about my kiddo a little bit. And so when he was 8 years old, we had two different doctors tell us he was so dyslexic, he would never be able to read. And my husband always says, don't ever tell Rita no, it never ends well. And I embrace that trait about myself. But that goes back to figure it out, right? It's that tenacious sort of characteristic that you've got this obstacle. Okay, let's figure it out. And so what I learned about my sweet son was that his particular variety of dyslexia had to do with sequencing. So he can't put things in order. So days of the week, months of the year, time, all of those things were just insanely hard for him. And so I thought, okay, right, so sequencing, let's get things in order. So giving instructions. And this has served me really well as a trainer. So I only ever give instructions one at a time. And I learned that from working with my son. So if I needed for him to get his socks and shoes, his jacket, and get in the car, I couldn't say, hey, buddy, get your socks and shoes, get your jacket, get in the car. Way too many instructions. He could not sequence that. So I would have to say, okay, I need for you to go get your socks. Now put your socks on. Go get your shoes. Put your shoes on, go get your jacket, put your jacket on, get in the car. Now, it was, we as a family, we learned to do that. There wasn't this whole string of instructions. It was one thing at a time. Let's focus on one thing at a time. Let's get good at that, get that done, and then move on. And then I think the other part of what happened with him, because he couldn't tell time, at our house, we learned to tell time in cartoons, right? So a cartoon is 30 minutes. So if we needed to be ready to go in an hour, I'd say, hey, buddy, we need to be ready to go in 2 cartoons. He got that. He got that frame of reference. So until he was about 13 or 14, our entire family told time in cartoons. So
that's awesome.
How many cartoons? Like if we needed to be out the door in 15 minutes, hey, we've got half a cartoon. Everybody got that frame of reference. So if we dig a little deeper into that why, I think everybody's got something that's in their way. Everybody's got an obstacle. Everybody's got a level of understanding, whether it's a complicated, complex thought process, or whether it's something very simple, like substituting the word and for but. Right? That's a super simple thing, but it profoundly changes your conversation. But as a facilitator, as a master trainer, I stand in this place of honor. And am I adapting? Am I adapting to those people in my classroom? Am I watching for those signs that they're getting it or not getting it? Am I telling the story the way they need it in order to make the connection? So if I dig a little deeper into my why, that just that experience living with this kiddo who needed something very different makes me very acutely aware of what does everybody in the room, does that person need a little more time? Do they need a little more privacy? Are they not understanding the words I'm saying? How can I do this differently in the moment? How can I adapt in the moment to capture the heart of that learner?
I think that's a profound statement. You're talking about doing that in training, but I think that should be our typical interactions. How do I adapt to be able to get that person to understand? Because we want everyone to understand us, but what am I going to do to help them make that bridge there? And I love that, the sequencing. It can be done, but you can only do it one step at a time. That's one of the things we talk about, getting things done. You can't do an entire project at once. You do all these actions that create a project. Any obstacle, you can't handle it all at once. It's going to take steps along the way. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So real quick, what is your fun fact?
My fun fact, my favorite fun fact is that my husband and I have been married for a really long time, but we were 19-year-old college sophomores. We dated for 2 weeks and he asked me to marry him. And being the wisest 19-year-old ever, I said, sure, let's do that. Now, it hasn't always been easy. Just like
not.
every marriage, there have been tough times and great times and hard times. It's been happy and hard. But I think sometimes it's that the wisdom of, I think young people can be very wise and just think, I recognize in you those qualities that I really like and that I know are things that are important to me. And so I'm going to take that leap of faith and make that decision.
That's awesome. That's 2 weeks. I think that rivals my parents pretty close, and they made it through many years as well. That's awesome.
I think, if any of my children had done that, I would have just had a fit. But and I'm sure my parents had some really strong reservations. But again, being the kind of parents they were, they just leaned in and let me do it.
Oh, that's great. That's kind of where you've been. What are you up to? What do you want to do in the weeks, months, years ahead? What is your vision, your focus for your life right now? And what inspired you to take this path, or what's inspiring you to stay?
That's such a great question. One of the things that I love to do is to write. I have a blog that I haven't paid much attention to recently just because I haven't made the time to do it, but I love to write. And I feel like there's a book in my head. I don't quite know what it is yet, but I feel like there's a story to be told. Overcoming the obstacles of my physical limitations, certainly, but over the last decade, over the last 10 years, I've had this amazing career trajectory, and I've had so much support and help along the way. And I feel like people may get to their late 30s, 40s, even into their 50s and think, I'm done. I don't have an option for anything new. And I want to say, absolutely not. Absolutely not. At a time when a lot of my peers were saying, yeah, I'm getting ready to retire, I'm planning for retirement, I'm launching this amazing career. And I just think I've got a long way to go yet before I even want to talk about retiring. And so that's one thing. I feel like I really want to spend some time writing and thinking about some of these things, thinking about how that never say die kind of attitude, and that figure it out, just figure it out. I think there's something to be said there.
I think
definitely want to write.
What I love also is you're out there on the court playing when others, like you said, are wanting to retire. I think that is leading by example, because I've always when I was young, I was like, I'm never going to retire. I'm going to find something to do, because that's just how I'm built. And I think as a trainer, we have to go out and practice what we teach. And I just think that some of the group we're with, that's what we tend to do. What's next? What's next? What can I create? But Reta, it has absolutely been a pleasure having you on. I appreciate it. And you've been inspiring to me, because anyone who can battle the imbalance that you've had in life and just your physical body and different things, that's just, thank you so much for figuring it out and being the way you do every day and helping people. I appreciate that so much. Love you, Reta. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you. And love you too, my friend. And thank you for inviting me. It's been an honor and a pleasure.
We'll get on and talk about training pieces sometime on another one, and try to talk about how to get people to step through those boundaries and inspire them to do that. But for this show, thank you so much. And everyone, thank you for joining us for another episode of A Shot of Inspiration. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of A Shot of Inspiration. If you like this or any of our other episodes, make sure you rate it and share it with a friend. This is Greg Stevens, and we look forward to being with you next time. Until then, be bold, be courageous, and respectfully speak your truth.